Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Labor Live at 12:05. My name is Alex Jorgensen. I'm the Communications Director here at the Alaska AFL-CIO, and Labor Live is where we talk about all things Juneau and how legislation is impacting the working families of Alaska. So today's episode is about elections. Now, you're probably thinking, elections? What is the connection between the labor movement and elections? Well, unions provide workers democracy in the workplace. We make sure that workers have rights on the jobs. We make sure that workers have the ability to vote to join a union if they so wish. So that democracy at the workplace is solely dependent on having true democracy and access at the ballot box. So there is a very strong connection between the labor movement and elections. So there are things happening in the legislature about elections, and we are lucky enough to be joined by an expert on this subject, someone who's been tracking different election legislation happening for the past couple of sessions and really wants to share with us some big grand compromise that has finally been reached about ensuring and protecting our right to vote at the ballot box. So without further ado, our special guest, the Executive Director of the Alaska Voter Hub, Emily Leak-Michie. Thank you so much for joining the program.
Hey, Alex, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we are excited to be talking about this issue. This is not, I don't think it's the first time we've talked about it per se on this program, but I know for the last couple legislative sessions, we've always been hearing about this, there's going to be an elections bill. We're going to tackle all these different minute issues that different people care about in one big omnibus package, and we're going to get it done. But year after year, it kind of seems to have fizzled out in the 11th hour. So I'm kind of wondering if you could provide our viewers a little bit of background on kind of how the election bill has kind of moved through the last couple of legislative sessions.
Yeah, for sure. As you kind of alluded to, this elections bill has been many years in the making. We were even looking back, members of our coalition have been writing letters of support for such bills for 8 to 10 years. Yeah, these provisions have the provisions in the bill have been considered for many sessions. You mentioned there's been folks working on this bill for up to a decade, and there's interest on all sides of the aisle. Folks really want to make sure that our elections are safe and secure. Folks really want to make sure that all eligible voters have equitable access to the polls. Folks want to make sure that our elections work for all eligible voters and not all valid votes are counted. So there's interest in this election bill, and I think it behooves all of us to make sure that our elections are accessible and fair and work for everyone.
Absolutely, and I think definitely, this is I know a bipartisan thing that everyone cares about. Everyone wants to have secure elections. Everyone wants to make sure that only people that are eligible to vote are able to vote. But obviously, I think there's definitely some discrepancies on how people kind of come to the same mutual agreement. So we've kind of heard recently that there's a new kind of compromise bill, Senate Bill 64, that's kind of been agreed to and maybe has some high hopes of passing. So I'm wondering if you could kind of fill us in on what this compromise is that's kind of being supported by, Democrats, Republicans, and independents alike.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about Senate Bill 64. So Senate Bill 64, as you mentioned, is a true piece of compromise legislation. It does a couple of things that we agree are going to improve our election systems. We are really excited about a voter roll cleanup process. So this isn't aimed to remove eligible voters, but make sure that the voter rolls reflect who's eligible to vote, and make sure that the folks that are on the voter rolls are registered at the correct address, that the contact information in the voter file is accurate. My organization does voter outreach and voter education, and the information that we get from the state in the voter rolls is oftentimes outdated. So that really impacts our ability to reach voters and do that nonpartisan voter education during election time. And so updating the voter rolls would help my organization. It would help the Division of Elections, anyone doing that voter education and outreach piece, and also make sure that the folks who are eligible are on the rolls, and those who maybe have moved out of state are no longer on there. There's a ballot curing process. In 2020, when was that? 2022, we had that statewide vote by mail, and there were many communities that had more than 10% of the ballots that were mailed to the division were not counted, and they were rejected by the state. Yeah, it was a huge percentage, and mostly in areas where English was not the primary language spoken. Most, in many of our rural communities as well, ballots were rejected at high rates. And that is because we don't have a ballot curing process. Curing lets folks who make an honest and understandable mistake on a absentee ballot cure their identifier. I think that's an important distinction. It helps it allows them to prove they are who they say they are. It doesn't allow them to change their vote, but it allows them to cure their identifier and then try again to fix an honest and reasonable mistake on their absentee ballot. This provision adds a ballot curing process, and then kind of right alongside that ballot curing process, it adds a ballot tracking process. I'm located in Anchorage, so I vote in the Anchorage municipal election, and we have a really cool system here in Anchorage where when I cast my vote by mail ballot, I can see where it is as it makes its way to the MOA, the municipality of Anchorage Election Center. So helps reassure me that my ballot is in the right hands the whole time. This also adds paid postage to absentee ballots. It creates a position for rural voting liaisons. Every year we hear about rural communities not having poll workers identified to run their polling places, or maybe their poll worker didn't show up. This adds a rural voting liaison position so that the Division of Elections can work directly with rural communities and ensure that there is a poll worker identified and then a backup poll worker identified, and all eligible Alaskan voters should have the opportunity to cast a vote in person if they so wish. So this makes sure that can happen. So those are the main takeaways. These are the things that we all agree, on all sides of the aisle, are known fixes, reasonable fixes to known problems.
Well, I mean, that is so exciting. There's so many elements, I think, of this compromise that everyone has been wanting for so long. I mean, I think, if I could ask everyone watching this at home to raise their hand if they'd made an administrative mistake on some piece of paper that they filled out in their life, everyone would be raising their hands. And no one should lose their vote just because they made a simple mistake on a piece of paper. So that is so exciting that people can finally fix those mistakes and make sure that their vote is counted. And the rural voting liaisons, how important is that? Because it is so devastating to hear year after year of certain communities that effectively have their right to vote stripped away because they couldn't open a polling place. And I know it is a logistical challenge in a lot of these communities to open a polling place, but guess what? This is a fundamental right. And I think the state needs to be doing everything it can to ensure that everyone can exercise that right on election day, which is all of our rights. So that is so exciting that got included in the bill.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. Everyone deserves that, the opportunity to exercise that right. And this really, expands the opportunity to exercise that right. So I'm really excited about this bill. I'm super grateful for the legislators that are putting in the hard work to get this across the finish line, hopefully this session.
So you mentioned the finish line. Where kind of are we at in the process? And, let's say there's someone at home that is just really excited about this new compromise and they want to help out. They want to write the lawmaker, or, what can people do to help get this bill across the finish line?
Absolutely. Yeah. Senate Bill 64 is currently in House Finance. So we expect a new committee substitute on the bill and it will be heard in House Finance, we hope soon. And so if you live in a district where your representative is a member of that committee, you should reach out to them. Let them know that this is a priority issue for you. Let them know that you support this bill. You want to make sure that voters in your district and voters across the state can exercise their right to vote. So if you haven't already, reach out to your representative, let them know that you support Senate Bill 64. And then we hope to see it on the House floor soon.
That is so exciting. And for those of you at home, if you get the Labor Lowdown, our weekly legislative newsletter, we're going to be putting this information in there whenever it gets scheduled. Maybe we'll see when the schedule comes out this Thursday, if it's on the calendar for next week. But whenever that comes out, whenever there's a public opportunity to testify on SB 64, we're going to make sure to notify everyone so we can really flood the gates with people that support our right to vote. So Emily, I want to thank you so much for coming on the program, taking time out of your day to share with the labor community about this really important election bill. Labor stands behind it, and we're going to make sure we get this thing across the finish line.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex, and thanks everyone watching.
Awesome. Well, folks, that is it for this week's episode of Labor Live at 12:05. Make sure to tune in next week. We're going to be talking all things wages. Have you ever been looking and applying for a job and noticed, man, they didn't post the salary. They didn't post the salary schedule. Well, we're gonna be talking with Senator Forrest Dunbar, who is authoring legislation to fix that exact issue. So make sure to tune in next week as we talk about all things wages. Again, thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll